Hello, this is Total Telecom, and welcome to today's webinar on hyper-innovation. Today we're looking at why it's critical to success in 5G and IoT. Our presenter today is Steve Corcoran from Mitel Mobility. He's the head of strategy there and has an important role in directing the strategy of the mobile division, which encompasses 4G, LTE and IMS solutions, as well as the emergence into the world of 5G. Steve's been in the industry for a long time, previously worked for Nortel, Alcatel-Lucent, Maven Air, amongst other companies, and has worked in a whole range of architecture, design, product management and strategy roles. Today, if you want to ask any questions during the webinar, please do so using the chat box that you should see on your screen. If you have any problems accessing the webinar, please send us an email, ads@totaltele.com. We won't answer any questions until the end today, but we will endeavour to get through as many as we can, the whole process being hopefully about 45 minutes. Any questions that we don't get to on the live webinar, then we'll go over to Mitel, and I'm sure Steve will address them for you offline afterwards. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Steve.
Thanks, Rob. Well, I appreciate everyone who's on the line today. Let's go ahead and kick things off. I think it's important for me to, first of all, tell you a little bit about Mitel and why we're relevant in this space. Back in 2015, Mitel acquired a company called Maven, which became the Mitel Mobile Business Division. We are a key IMS and application vendor for many of the leading Tier 1 global operators, particularly in Europe and North America. However, not going through this entire slide, the key takeaway is that we have an unparalleled track record in bringing new all IP-based technologies and innovation into the mobile operator core networks. This really gives us a unique insight into the challenges the mobile operators are facing, especially as we head towards an all IT network of the future. So we'll get right to the meat of the subject matter. The mobile operator community is really being placed in a very difficult situation due to a wide variety of changes that really span every facet of their network. Some of these changes include rapidly increasing customer demand for faster and faster data speeds, increasingly complex and more capable devices that are placing different demands onto the network, new OTT entrants with dramatically different business models that are providing core services like voice, messaging, and video for free, thus commoditizing the traditional operator anchor services. And as we move on even further, with IoT, even who is communicating is changing as we shift from predominantly human communication to devices communicating together. With 5G on the horizon promising fast, lower latency networks and enabling the IT revolution, the question is, what do the mobile service providers need to learn and change in order to stay part of the value chain and not just a utility bit pipe? To do this, I want to take us back a little bit and explain how we got here and how this is influencing the decisions that are being made today. At the start, the network was really the service, primarily oriented around voice and then adding text messaging. Then over-the-top players started to change the communication experience in broadband markets by introducing services like chat, video, file sharing, emoticons, and presence. With the introduction of LTE and mobile broadband, we started to finally see these services getting expanded to the mobile user. The services were now capable of being delivered across multiple access technologies and provided a richer user experience with much better quality. Once there was sufficient LTE coverage, voice over LTE was introduced. While from an end user perspective, this really made little to no difference. They've had voice. This was just another version of voice. The really key aspect was that VoLTE required an IMS core. By requiring IMS, mobile operators were required to completely redesign and create a new all-IP voice core network for the first time, really moving beyond circuit switch voice and and really making the service independent of the network for the very first time. However, even with the introduction of VoLTE and the IMS core, innovation has been very slow within the mobile operator community. What innovation has been introduced has been fairly minor and really is incremental. Some examples include voice over Wi-Fi, a very limited uptake of WebRTC, and some multi-device or multi-line solutions. Innovation has really been occurring at traditional GSMA standardization cycles rather than that internet speeds. However, the internet has not been waiting on the standardization processes from GSMA or 3GPP. API providers are rapidly innovating and enabling web developers to do what they do well, create innovative new services. So really this takes us into moving forward from here. What is 5G going to be bringing? It's important to note that the demands of 5G really cover a very broad spectrum of capabilities, and this includes things like broadband access in dense areas, ultra-reliable communications, broadband access everywhere, massive Internet of Things communications, high user mobility, extreme real-time communications, and lifeline communications. However, these are just new capabilities that existing networks are not really well designed to handle. Ultimately, 5G and IoT are going to be driven by use cases, and these can be broken down into consumer services, enterprise services, verticals, OTT, and third-party use cases. In order to address the wide array of use cases, an entirely new type of network is required, one that is automated, dynamic, sliced, and API-driven. In short, 5G is not just another G. It's not just a faster radio connection. It's really a network capable of enabling Internet-style innovation. And this is really key. Once again, it's bringing that automation and being able to introduce this innovation at a very, very rapid pace. While that may seem a very tall order, there is some good news for the mobile operators. There's a range of new technologies that are making the leap from the IT space into the telco space to facilitate this move to hyper-innovation that is required by the move to 5G. Some of these technologies include NFV and SDN, or Network Functions Virtualization and Software-Defined Network, microservices, utilizing open APIs and service development kits, as well as a DevOps deployment model. I'll go into a little bit more detail on each of these here. So NFV and SDN is really about a lot more than just virtualization. Vendors need to absolutely move beyond just virtualizing the blades to really unlock the full potential of these technologies. In order to truly maximize them, the product software needs to undergo a fundamental transformation. Some of these changes include eliminating the stateful information from virtual network functions, enabling an extremely efficient all-active architecture, essentially moving away from the active standby models that are predominant today. Shrinking and reducing the virtual machine size and complexity to allow for faster recovery as well as fast and dynamic elasticity. Separating the control and user plane to allow for independent scalability, and this is really where the SDN portion of it becomes very critical. As well as incorporating the latest software-based packet optimization techniques to eliminate the requirement for specialized hardware. The software truly needs to become hardware agnostic and still able to perform at very high levels. And eventually we'll see a move to containers to allow for even more simplicity and speed. What we're seeing right now in the vendor community, though, is there are typically three different approaches that are being taken. We'll start with where most late arrivals are at right now, and that is what I'll call the appliance model. And this is where you're doing basic virtualization. You're merely moving from blades to virtual machines and keeping most of the existing software structure. The second model is really the custom stack model, and what we're seeing is a lot of the larger incumbent telecom equipment manufacturers are pushing that they have the best route for simplicity, and that, once again, with all the additional complexity, having a single vendor in charge of the innovation and the VNFs that are being introduced makes for a simpler model. Mitel is actually following the third model, which I'll call the common platform model, and this is really about truly opening up the NFV and SDN ecosystem by not having a single vendor in charge of limiting that innovation that's coming in. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Let's go ahead and shift to the concept of microservices. In short, the concept is that we're going to decompose each service into its smallest logical reusable component. In that, each microservice has its own life cycle and can be independently created and scaled as demand requires. Another concept that's really closely tied to microservices is the use of APIs to facilitate service construction. As with optimizing NFV and SDN, though, this requires a new approach to software development. It's something that requires it to be really reanalyzed and not just carried forward as it was in previous iterations. As mentioned on the previous slide, without the use of APIs, microservices are of very limited value. But by exposing APIs, those microservices can enable rapid development and innovation. This is especially important when looked at in the context of pursuing verticals and trying to meet the very dynamic use cases that the Internet of Things will require. However, by themselves, they are not sufficient. What's really required is an easy-to-use, capable software development kit, or SDK. Without this ease of use, this ability to have more developers, app developers, etc. coming in, then we're really going to be missing the boat, as previous versions of this have really been limited to very technical telecom-specific developers. And ultimately, if we don't have that wide variety of developers utilizing this, the technology will be bypassed and discarded for something else. So I've really left the best for last. However, this is really the most important one of the changes that is required. It's definitely the most difficult to implement, and that is moving towards a DevOps model. So everything that I've talked about previously was really about enablers that allow the changing of the technology, the way the software is structured, etc. But now we're really going to need to be talking about how do we actually change the way this innovation is brought to market. We as an industry really have to move away from the traditional development model where something is developed and deployed over a 9 to 12 month cycle. You introduce large amounts of changes, and because you're introducing large amounts of changes, this can only be done a couple times a year at tops. Once again, this is not something that is new. This is something that has been used by the web development companies, primarily things like Netflix, Amazon, and Facebook have been using DevOps to continuously deliver quality experiences and to meet rapidly changing customer needs. Just as an example of this, when Facebook would go out, they would roll out, say, 100 different types or instances of the way that their opening screen would look. And then they would go through and discard that which wasn't being received well and build upon the things that were being received well. And it's really critical that we take this type of fast-fail mentality and bring it into the operator community. So this is really a key fundamental change that's not just for the vendor, though. This really gets into impacting the way the operator is structured and how they deal with vendors as well. So this is something that has to span both the vendor and the operator community. And I really think this is going to be the biggest challenge is going to be on the operators themselves. So this is going to be able to pull in and be able to put a structure in place that allows for very small changes to be rapidly introduced into the network. And as I said, this requires a very big restructuring, typically internally, and once again, aligning with the vendor community. However, these are not technologies that are off in the future. I think it's really important to note that these technologies are actually being introduced today. And I wanted to roll through just a couple of examples of things where Mitel is bringing these innovations into the marketplace today. So we have been working with exposing APIs to Tier 1 carriers in Asia-Pac, in Europe, and in North America, where we are exposing those APIs and bringing, essentially allowing our enhanced voice, video, and messaging capabilities to be utilized by third-party developers to once again attack those use cases that the marketplace is demanding at this point. Ultimately, innovation has to be brought by the operator for their own services. It has to be brought by the vendor to bring new capabilities to market. But even more importantly, those capabilities need to be exposed to that large third-party development environment and all those developers in order to really unleash the full power of that innovation. We've also been engaged in a DevOps model with a growing Tier 1 North American carrier. And this has really given us some keen insights into working in a very different manner where both the end operator as well as the vendor have a clear view of success. And once again, as the development is being done and as new capabilities are being delivered, both the vendor and the operator are closely monitoring and refining that all the way until it gets released. So once again, baby steps, but still steps down the road of being able to more quickly bring that innovation in the marketplace. The other area that Mitel has really specialized in is really allowing new technologies and innovation to come into the vertical space. And some examples of that are going into the healthcare space via the ElderCare product we have, going into the hospitality vertical with our connected guests, as well as working with in the field services area with FieldAware. We've also started moving into the emergency broadcast services space for emergency response services. And as with many things, many more verticals will be brought out in the near future. So really, I wanted to spend some time going through the summary of this. I do believe that the hyper-innovation is absolutely critical for the operator to maintain relevancy. I think it's also very critical for that innovation to occur across multiple fronts. That's the vendor community, bringing new and innovative technologies to the operator. That's the vendor enabling those technologies to be modified and innovation being brought by the actual mobile network operator as well. So, as we look at this, the operators themselves will need to stay within that value chain. There will be a need for very specific things that really only the mobile network operator can provide. A lot of this can get in around things like quality of service or quality of user experience at this point, whether that's with low latency, high bandwidth requirements, maybe around a high definition video, etc. The operator is going to play a very, very key role in being able to once again keep their brand fresh and keep the operator's brand as something that the end user will relate to. But in addition, the operators are going to be in competition with each other to see who can have a network that is easiest to be utilized by this third-party development and vertical community. And this is really where I see time to market is a critical factor here, as those who have a network that is able to be used and is capable of allowing those verticals to come on board and bring that capability to their end user subscribers will be the preferred operator that those network services and by default their subscribers will migrate onto. So once again, this is where I really see a lot of the push, if you will, from the operator is moving beyond just the consumer services and moving into the enterprise, the vertical space, and once again allowing that entirely new set of revenue opportunities to be made available to them. This is also particularly critical while, as we mentioned previously, the OTT players are really going after and commoditizing those core anchor services that they have relied upon for the past several decades with the voice, the video, and the messaging. But once again, it is incumbent upon both the vendor and the operator community that we need to be aggressive in changing the way we build and manage networks. And this is not just a porting of software, as I said, with virtualization. This is a much more fundamental change. This is actually getting in and restructuring that software to take full advantage of these new technologies as we shift from this all IP to all IT network of the future. So what you will see is vendors will be moving at different speeds. Those who have existing legacy products will probably be more challenged, particularly as they're trying to maintain those and the revenue that comes in from those for as long as possible. And they will also pick and choose areas that they will show progress in the space. But then you will also see other companies that will be able to move much faster, particularly if they don't have the legacy base that's sort of anchoring them and holding them back. And I think you'll see that the operator community will start looking more and more to those type of companies in order to bring that innovation into their market space. So, to recap a little bit more, the networks are changing, not just what is being communicated, but who is doing the communicating and how they are used. We're really getting to a lot more of what I'll call contextual communication. It's no longer about just voice and text messaging. As we're getting into more video, more instant messaging, more file transfer, things that are not standalone. It's really, they're being used where it's appropriate in the right environment, and it's very contextual to the scenario or the environment that the end user is at. But we'll also see, as I said, as a shift with the Internet of Things comes along, more of a move from human communication, even though that will still remain a very big, and actually that will still remain the largest portion of the Internet of Things communication for quite a while, to more of a devices communicating. With the microservices and the open APIs, what you'll see is really a voice will be given to those devices. And then once again, they will be able to do things via sensors and other technologies to initiate and essentially allow for that further automation, which will bring those capabilities more immediacy to the end user. And I think ultimately this will lead to a much higher uptake, a better user experience, and ultimately more customer satisfaction. So as we talk about the way we build networks, I briefly talked about this just a second ago, but the automation is really going to be crucial. Without having that automation, we really cannot get to the point where we can do network slicing, which is a critical component within the Internet of Things. Without the ability to rapidly bring up independent networks that are very specialized, once again, whether that's through extremely high throughput, very low latency, etc., that are isolated from the remaining use cases, if this is all a very manual process, there will be very little uptake. The business cases that would actually be successful in that model are extremely limited. However, if we're able to truly go through and bring the automation that we need in, and this is really where NFV and SDN need to be maximized fully, the range of business cases that can be brought in can be dramatically increased. However, all this has to be done in a very dynamic and robust manner. So while the IT way of doing things are being brought into the telco core, there's still an expectation of very high quality, very high expectations on the user experience. And once again, the NFV and SDN framework, if done properly, can actually meet both of those goals. And then once again, I'm going to highlight a little bit more about no one of these technologies in and of itself is going to be sufficient. It's really about all of these enablers coming together, changing the way we bring that innovation to the marketplace. This is where, as I said, the DevOps model becomes absolutely vital. If we continue trying to develop along the 3GPP specification timelines, along the way of traditional telecom equipment manufacturer vendor timelines, the operator will become an irrelevant bit pipe very quickly. Essentially, the innovation is occurring, as I was saying. The API providers, the community out there, is going to do what they require in order to be successful, and it's really on the vendors and the mobile operators at this point to allow the innovation to provide that basic framework, the infrastructure that would allow those third parties to come in and utilize it without having to become telecom experts. This is really a key component here, which is, we have to be able to move beyond the telco space into the web, the app space, and make it so that you don't have to have a PhD in telecom for 20 years in order to be developing an efficient app. We need to take the lessons that were learned, particularly as working with, say, Apple in the past, where when the first iPhone was introduced, it cratered several networks. We, as the vendor and operator community, know how mobile operators work, and we need to use that knowledge in order to make those APIs and the SDKs so that these non-telecom knowledgeable web designers and developers and app developers can build the services they need in a very efficient and useful manner, as opposed to being in competition and potentially putting the network at risk. All right, so Rob, I've rolled through my slides here. I think this might be a good time for questions.
Yeah, thanks for that, Steve. It was really interesting. Very informative there, a lot of ground covered. There's quite a few people listening to this, so I think we've got a few questions that have come in. First one, though, and I think it's been asked in a few different ways here, and if you've talked a lot about a need for the operators to change, I suppose you might say, their model to implement DevOps as a sort of platform. What are the biggest challenges they're facing if they're going to do that?
This is really, as I said, it's a bottom-to-top change that's required, and many times this actually requires significant organizational changes internally. The traditional, I'll call it the waterfall model, whatever, there's been a few changes that have occurred through this. Many of the, particularly the tier 1 operators, have a philosophy that says, I do not want a piece of software that's in my lab to be validated until it has become GA or generally available, i.e. I don't want to be the guinea pig that I'm figuring out the bugs and working things through. This model has to really be completely turned on its head, and this is where particularly Mitel's experience in working in this DevOps Lite model that we've been doing is oftentimes what occurs is when the software actually gets provided to the end operator and they put it in their test bed and they run through it, they see that there are many things that they don't like or that will not be effective for their end users. Therefore, they have to have changes made, and this just further elongates the cycle. So what we're seeing at this point in time is by getting involved with the operator very early and making smaller incremental changes, it is much easier to fine-tune and make sure that you hit that critical user experience that determines whether or not the service will be utilized by the subscriber base. And that's ultimately the end goal, is the utilization of the service. So when I look at the operator community, this is really the big change, is changing that mentality, which is, I don't want to be part of that early cycle. Today, at the most, they're involved in initially setting the requirements that then go into development, and they don't typically see the product until it's all the way finished. You know, being pulled in and being part of the small minor changes that occur in order to end up getting something that is very specific for them, I think is that change. And what we've seen is this can require not just organizational changes, but also bringing in new people who are more familiar with this from the IT space, and allowing them to have more power and more control over that deployment process that has been around for several decades.
So Steve, are you saying there that in this new world, then operators have got to be prepared to release things that are wrong, that have got bugs in and need fixing, that are less than perfect? Is that what you're saying?
Well, exactly. But there are limits to that. As I said, the operator is still very much seen differently than, say, an internet provider, where if something doesn't work, they just roll out a new version and everyone's fine. Given the fact that communications are still considered critical, vital components, there are limits to that. However, in many instances, they do need to start moving towards this concept of failing fast. And this is really where they can take a lot of the lessons learned from those internet native companies, where you can roll out multiple instances, try things, and once again, keep the things that work, roll them out even broader, but discard the things that are not working. And as I said, this is a very different mindset. Typically, they've been very risk averse, and there's been very good reasons for this. Typically, they would have to invest in a tremendous amount of potentially proprietary hardware under the hopes that it would be adopted and scaled to a large degree. This is a very big disincentive to trying things that might not work. So, you know, they were wanting to make sure something was going to be successful before investing in it heavily. And I think that model has to change with NFV, with SDN, being able to use the automation and bring up these very small, very granular core networks, services, try them out. If they work, great, you scale them up, you tweak them as is required. But if they don't work, you merely recycle them and bring up a new service and try that. And that's really where I think the value, as I said, particularly of NFV, SDN, and tying into the automation, reduces a tremendous barrier that operators have had, as far as they can't afford to make mistakes under the current model.
Okay, so let's assume for a minute that they can change the mindset and do this. In a sort of very complex world where they're looking to as you say, fail fast, can you do this with multiple vendors, or does this mean you've got to go out and look at a solution from a single vendor? Well,
this is sort of the catch-22 that I think a lot of the operators find themselves in. When you start seeing the vast array of acronyms, you start seeing the new technologies and the complexity that on the surface appears to be introduced with these, the natural reaction, I think, is I need to go with a single vendor and allow them to manage this for me. Unfortunately, while that makes sense on one level, that really destroys the purpose and the intention of the technology, because you're then going to be very much limiting the speed and the volume of innovation that's going to be made available. So this is where, what we're seeing is there should be an integrator, a master integrator who's doing this, but there needs to be a clear separation, if you will, between the various levels of vendors that are providing technology, whether that's at the hardware level, whether that's at the management and orchestration level, the MANO level, that's at the virtualized network function or the services level. once again, I think you'll see that there will be specialization in these various areas, and it's really important to keep competition. Ultimately, when you remove competition, you are by default going to be removing innovation and definitely slowing things down, and that's the opposite of what the operators need to be doing at this point in time.
So, this is surely the same thing that the vendors have been talking about for a long time. Lots of them have been talking about their own development platforms, their development kits. It hasn't been uniformly successful, has it? So why is it going to be any different now?
That's a very good question. So I think those of us who've been around the industry for a long time know that service creation environments, service development kits are really nothing new. The major vendors have had these for going on decades plus. Particularly, this was initially done around the IN or the SCP space, where they were coming in and basically trying to convince operators that they could rapidly modify and innovate on their IN services that they could bring to marketplace. Where I think the fatal flaw in that previous iterations of this were was that you still had to have a very deep, very thorough knowledge of telecom, about how mobile networks work in order to do this well. I mean, and at the end of the day, if you have to have 20 years in the telecom industry, a PhD in this or that in order to be able to do this, plus 10 years of experience, you're extremely limiting the amount of content or innovation that can come in. What I see now that's really exciting to me is that we're now starting to realize those limitations and once again take the knowledge and the experience from the IT space and make that available to a much, much broader set of web and app developers. So by the development of the APIs and the SDKs we see now, I'll go through and give an example here. This is with Mitel having worked in the field with FieldAware and the field services space. That third-party vertical who knows their industry very well does not have to know how a mobile call is made. They do not have to know how a message is sent over a mobile network. They're merely able to use very simple, very intuitive APIs and SDKs that call out those APIs and make them available to make a phone call, to make a video call, to change it to a conference call, to initiate instant messaging, to transfer geographic information. All of these various things are now simple. And they're simple, but they're still being done in a way that is very efficient within the network itself. So it's really getting to the point where we have the best of both worlds. We do have the capabilities being developed by the technical experts, but then making those capabilities available to a much broader set of cloud developers. And as we've been seeing through the internet side of things, there is really no limit to the innovation that's out there and the ideas that can be brought in that space.
Okay. All right, that's interesting. Now we've got a question in here, which I'm just going to read off the screen, to be honest, because it goes beyond my technical knowledge or understanding, to be honest. But someone's asking here about container adoption within mobile carriers. Now I'm not sure beyond a superficial level what container adoption really is, but I'm not a techie. So, but what's your view on this? Is it an issue for mobile carriers? What's happening there?
Containers are very, to me, they're the next step as we move down the NFV and SDN road, if you will. Right now, the NFV and SDN technology is getting more and more mature. Containers are a little less mature right now. I think the concepts behind them, which essentially is to allow the virtual machines to not have the overhead that they have today with the operating system, etc., allowing them to once again get smaller and faster. I think you're going to hear these common themes over and over again with the technology coming out, is that smaller and faster is preferred as opposed to something that is very specific and unique. And I think I've heard some very interesting discussions around the concepts of pets and cattle, where things that are one-offs versus things that are very commodity and can be used and discarded as necessary. So what we're seeing right now is that the containers at this point are a little bit farther behind from a maturity perspective. There are some things around security, being able to isolate the services from each other so that there's no problems there. However, I'm confident these things are being worked through, and it's really just an issue of what is the time period before the container technology reaches the maturity level enough to be deployed commercially. And I think what we're seeing at this point is that's probably going to be somewhere around the 2019-2020 time period.
That's quite, well, it's quite, I was going to say it's quite a way off. It's not that far off, is it then, Steve, really? No, it's not really. Now,
it may seem like that's a long time off, but as we've seen at this point, things are rapidly increasing, and once again, the innovation is coming faster and faster, and by default, it's taking them a little bit longer, but the standardization processes are trying as well to start accelerating and speeding up, so hopefully we can see continued progress in that space.
Okay. All right. Now, we're pretty much out of time. We said we were going to wrap this up in sort of 45 minutes, which is where we are. I'm going to leave you to comment on the parting shot from my point of view. And I think really what you've been saying here is that telcos need to function more like an OTT, a Facebook or a Google or something like that, if they're going to compete these days in this space and develop these models. Now, to me, that seems more like a cultural change rather than necessarily a technical change. So, can they do it? And that's my parting shot. Can they do it? Will they do it?
Well, I think we'll see varying levels of success. I think the operators that are quicker to embrace the technology and to restructure, do what's required internally in order to allow those technologies to be utilized will have a distinct advantage. I mean, my main statement that I want to get across to our community at this point in time is that the good news is the technology exists. Now it's incumbent upon us to bring that technology into the marketplace and make it commercial. So I know that Mitel is very keen on this, and once again, we are going to continue our leadership in this space because ultimately it's not about the technology itself, it's about what the technology is doing and enabling in the market space. So my parting shot, if you will, on this is that we need to move the technology beyond PowerPoints and actually start making it useful and start solving these use cases and enabling this whole new area of 5G and Internet of Things services that are going to be demanded.
Fantastic. Steve, that sounds a fantastic place to leave it for today. So all that remains really is for me to thank Steve Corcoran for his views today and for giving us so much insight on this subject. Thank Mitel Mobility for sponsoring today's webinar on hyper innovation, and to thank all of you for attending, and hopefully you found this useful. We will be releasing a recording of the webinar very shortly, which will be available via the Total Telecom website, and any questions that we haven't answered I'm sure that Mitel will take offline. So thank you for attending, and we'll see you at the next webinar.